Mind control. Does that sound like something straight out of a sci-fi thriller? Secret labs, shadowy figures.
It really does. Or maybe it's something a bit more familiar, something we see kind of every day.
Yeah, it's easy to just dismiss it, right?
Yeah.
As pure fiction.
Totally. But when you actually look closely at how people influence others, persuade them, and yeah, sometimes manipulate them, you start to see these forces are, well, deeply woven into our reality.
Okay, let's dive into that then. Today, our source material is the book Mind Control, Manipulation, Deception, and Persuasion Exposed by Jeffrey Dawson. Came out in 2014.
Right. And Dawson's book, it really pulls back the curtain on the whole mechanics of influence, how it works, why it works, and who's using these methods.
So our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. Take the most important insights from this source. Think of it as a shortcut.
A shortcut to understanding those hidden levers of influence, yeah. How to spot them when they're being used on you.
And maybe even how you might use that understanding yourself. But crucially, responsibly.
Exactly. We're going to explore how these techniques aren't just in, like, weird fringe groups. They show up in personal relationships, big group dynamics.
The marketing you see constantly.
Oh, definitely. And even, as the book argues pretty strongly, in education itself.
So the big question for you listening is, how can getting a handle on all of this help you navigate the world, more effectively? Let's find out.
Okay, so right off the bat, one of the first things the book does is it tries to clarify some key terms.
Yep.
Because people mix them up all the time.
Like mind control and brainwashing.
Exactly. It makes a really clear distinction between them.
I kind of thought they were pretty much interchangeable.
That's a super common assumption. But the book says no, they're quite different. They operate on vastly different principles.
Okay.
Brainwashing, according to Dawson, it's actually a much newer concept. And it's primarily focused on violent, coercive compliance, getting people to obey through force.
Where did that term even originate?
It's interesting. It was coined during the Korean War. The book mentions it was used to explain something really shocking at the time.
Which was?
Why 21 American POWs out of maybe 20,000 actually defected to their communist captors. And there were also these incidents where some prisoners made false confessions, like saying the U.S. was using biological warfare.
Wow. So brainwashing, in that original context, it was seen as this way to just break someone's will through really intense pressure and coercion, forcing them to conform.
Precisely. It's about breaking down resistance using forceful means. Now, the mind control that Dawson mainly talks about in the book, that operates differently.
How
So it's
so?
centered more on manipulation and deception, often without that same level of, obvious physical violence.
Well, the impact can still be huge.
Oh, absolutely. The emotional and psychological harm can be profound, maybe even worse in the long run.
Okay, that distinction makes a lot of sense. So how does this manipulation-based mind control actually work? Especially on individuals. The book lays out a kind of process, right?
It does. It describes the agent's objective as essentially trying to unweave the target from their existing life. Unweave? Yeah, like disconnect them from their past, their values, their core beliefs. They try to make your previous life seem, well, flawed or wrong or just not good enough.
Like they're dismantling your foundation.
Exactly. The whole goal is to destabilize your sense of self, your world, basically. Make you more open, more susceptible.
To the agent's new ideas or ideology.
Right.
So how do they even pick someone or get that process rolling?
It usually starts with establishing some kind of connection, building trust, but it's highly calculated.
Calculated how?
Well, manipulators, according to the book, they actively scan people for susceptibility. They're reading body language, verbal cues,
Like what kind of cues?
things like posture, how someone uses their hands, eye contact, even, believe it or not, how fast they blink or the length of their walking stride.
Seriously, they're looking for signs of weakness, insecurity.
Yeah, that's a key part. Things like folded arms might signal defensiveness. They assess weaknesses, sure, but also interests, strengths, looking for any potential entry point.
And the book mentions personas. Private, public.
Right. Private, public, and reputation personas. Manipulators apparently analyze these very quickly, focusing heavily on making that critical first impression count.
And they use what they learned to?
Yeah.
What? Change who they seem to be.
That's the really clever, or maybe creepy part. The agent essentially morphs their own self-presentation. They become the person they think will appeal most to you.
Just to get attention and trust?
It's the fastest way. They'll subtly send out these 4 basic messages. I like you, we're alike, you can trust me, and we're good for each other.
Wow.
This whole stage is about building that initial rapport. And Dawson notes these steps aren't always linear. They can overlap or happen in a different order.
That sounds incredibly deliberate, almost cold.
It is.
Hmm.
And once that connection starts forming, the methods they use to deepen the control, they can get more intense. Isolation is a crucial one. The book really stresses limiting the target's contact with the outside world.
How do they do that?
Think intense seminars, mandatory meetups, or even, if possible, arranging things so the target is basically living in the agent's environment 24/7.
Cutting them off from friends, family, their support system.
Exactly. Depriving them of other perspectives, other sources of validation. Another method mentioned is weakening the body.
Physically.
Yeah, restricting food intake is apparently quite common. You see it in cults, abusive relationships, and it's often disguised.
How disguised?
Like, hey, let's go on this diet together. Something that sounds innocent, even healthy.
That's a terrifying manipulation of something normal.
It really highlights how insidious this can be. Then there are late night sessions.
Why late nights?
Simple. Your brain's tired, your critical thinking faculties are impaired, you're less likely to question things, more likely to agree.
Bypassing your conscious filters.
Pretty much. And in group settings, public confessions are singled out as a really powerful tactic.
Why confessions?
It kind of unfreezes the victims, breaks down their sense of personal privacy, and as the book puts it, it merges them with the group in an unhealthy way.
What about the emotional toll? Does the book cover that?
Oh, yeah. Humiliation and insult are tools, often subtle at first, but designed to instill self-doubt, to make targets question their own judgment, their grasp on reality.
And if you're in a group,
That message gets reinforced by the other members or by the agent leading the group. It's a feedback loop.
it really sounds like a systematic process.
Yeah.
Breaking someone down, then rebuilding them in a new image.
That's exactly the design. As the target's sense of self starts to crumble, the agent steps in. They steer the person towards accepting the manipulator's ideology, presenting it as the only solution to all their problems, all that turmoil they're feeling.
What happens if someone in the group starts to push back, starts questioning things?
According to Dawson, they get dealt with quickly. Anyone questioning the ideology is isolated, maybe defamed publicly within the group.
Made an example of.
Right. A warning to everyone else. By this stage, the target is often riding these intense emotional waves. The agent is steering them from misery to moments of ecstasy or making the agent seem like the only answer. They just desperately want the self-doubt, the confusion to end.
And peer pressure must be immense in that kind of environment.
Absolutely huge. There are unspoken rules. The target feels compelled to comply with what the agent demands, especially in front of others.
And doing it publicly?
The book argues that fixes the action in their mind. It makes them believe they chose to do it, that it was their own free will. Resistance starts to fade as they reach what Dawson calls the apogee of mind control.
Apogee. The peak. That's a chilling term for it. The peak of someone else's control over you.
It is, and the impact on the target by this point, it's devastating. When mind control is used maliciously, especially in cults, followers lose their autonomy. Their moral compass goes haywire. Their ability to think independently just evaporates.
The book gives examples, right?
Yeah, the horrifying example of David Koresh at Waco. His followers believed everything he said, were apparently powerless against his commands. Parents tragically stood by while children were abused because the control was that total.
That's just a stark illustration of absolute control.
It is, and the damage, the book really emphasizes this, can be incredibly long-lasting. It tells a story of a woman who escaped an abusive partner after 6 years.
6.
Yeah, and she faced physical danger. Even during her escape, he came after her with a sword, apparently. But even after getting away, it took her 5 years. 5 years just to feel normal again, to learn how to live independently.
Wow.
The physical abuse might fade, but the emotional and psychological damage, the book it can be permanent. It makes rebuilding your life incredibly difficult. That's the real devastating cost.
So we've seen this intense, very personal process. But the book also argues these techniques aren't just limited to one-on-one stuff or small cults, right? It talks about applications on a much larger scale.
Exactly. When the focus shifts to, say, governments, big corporations, or what the book calls elites, their main goal usually isn't about manipulating one person for money. It's broader. It's about power, keeping large populations in line, ensuring the stability of the system.
Okay, but how do they get that kind of compliance from millions of people? without using the overt force like the brainwashing we talked about.
It's done through more surreptitious methods, sneakier ways, aimed at getting mass compliance, and this is key, impairing critical thinking skills across the board.
So people think they're making their own choices.
That's the goal. They genuinely believe they are. But the source suggests that mass media plays a huge role in undermining this ability. That, alongside something it calls language degradation.
Mass media and language degradation. What's the connection there, according to Dawson?
Well, he suggests things like a decline in deep reading habits, combined with more passive consumption of visual media, maybe simplified text like texting. This can all contribute to a reduced capacity for complex thought. He even puts it as starkly as losing the ability to name what's wrong.
That's a really provocative idea.
Yeah.
And the book points a finger at education, too, doesn't it? It doesn't hold back there.
No, it makes a very strong claim. It describes organized, systematic education as potentially a perfect mind-controlling method, ripe for large-scale indoctrination if someone wants control.
That sounds extreme.
It uses the Hitler Youth as the starkest example, a deliberate system designed to hammer in specific ideals, demand conformity, manipulate the natural desire for status through rewards and punishments, and even use peer monitoring.
Teaching obedience from a very young age.
Precisely, creating that foundation for an authoritarian regime. Now, importantly, the book does contrast this with education's intended purpose, which is, to cultivate thinkers who can innovate and contribute positively.
So inhibiting critical thinking isn't actually good for the state in the long run.
Dawson argues no, it ultimately serves a small elite who can exploit a less critical populace, but not the state itself. He uses the collapse of the Third Reich as an example of where that whole approach ultimately fails society.
Okay, what about the more commercial side? Propaganda, advertising.
The book calls this sugar-coated mind control, specifically in commerce. It's all about figuring out or maybe telling the masses what they want or need.
And advertising uses.
Powerful, simple, easy-to-digest messages, specifically designed, the book argues, to trigger buying behavior, often bypassing rational thought.
And branding fits in here too, obviously.
Oh, massively. Dawson points out how consumers literally become walking billboards. We pay companies for the privilege of wearing their logos and advertising for them. He asks, what's more effective than making money while your customers do your marketing?
That's a good point. And what about the modern digital angle?
Disguised advertising. Messages hidden within content that looks like it's just friendly or organic. Stuff that gets shared unthinkingly across social media. The book frames this as a kind of modern evolution of those older ideas about subliminal messaging.
So this influence, this manipulation, it's not just in these dramatic scenarios or abstract systems. The book really emphasizes it's, pervasive. Where else does it suggest we find it?
Yeah, the source is crystal clear on this. Manipulation isn't confined to specific groups like cults or certain professions. It's fundamentally about people. Human nature, human interaction. It's found everywhere people are.
Everywhere.
Dawson actually lists a whole bunch of areas. Religions, politics, mass media, education, relationships, marketing. And yeah, maybe surprisingly, even hairdressing. Just a casual interaction where subtle persuasion can happen.
Hairdressing. Okay, that really drives home the everywhere point.
It does. And the book reinforces that anyone can potentially fall victim to cult mind control. It actually mentions the original Latin word cultus just meant any religious denomination. The modern meaning is narrower, focusing on groups with those harmful control dynamics.
And strict religious cults are seen as particularly vulnerable ground for abuse.
They're presented as highly susceptible, because of their structure, the level of demand and commitment. Dawson brings up Jim Jones and David Koresh again as men who fully exploited this understanding for total control.
It goes into detail about Koresh.
Yeah, noting Koresh lacked formal education but had this powerful, charismatic, interpretive ability. How he controlled followers' food, changed rules arbitrarily claiming divine direction, and tragically the abuse of young girls, which their parents, completely caught up in the cult ideology, were powerless to stop.
The level of psychological capture there is just deeply disturbing.
It really is. And the source also uses the Catholic Church abuse scandal as a large-scale institutional example.
Of abuse of power within religion.
Exactly. Detailing priests preying on children, the institution allegedly conspiring to hide it by moving abusers, how church theology itself made defrocking difficult, allegations of blackmail influencing the hierarchy, and the heartbreaking silence of victims, often compelled by years of ingrained control and influence.
And it's not just big institutions or organized groups. Individuals can do this too.
Absolutely. The book makes the point that random individuals can and do wield these techniques with malicious intent. It cites serial killers and psychopaths as extreme examples, people who often manipulate victims and everyone around them very effectively.
Okay, so if this stuff is that pervasive, used by individuals, groups, huge systems, what exactly are the tools? What's in this agent's arsenal the book describes?
Right. The book gets quite practical here. One tool it mentions, apparently drawn from observations in network marketing, is understanding basic personality types.
Personality types.
Dawson categorizes people into 4 basic colors. Yellows, who are driven by empathy, pity, helping others. Greens, who focus on details, logic, benefits. Blues, who seek familiarity, friendship, connection. And reds, motivated by competition, winning, being leaders.
Okay, and the insight here is that if you can figure out someone's type, you can tailor your pitch.
Exactly. That's the core nugget. People are wired differently, right? Manipulators use that knowledge. It gives them a head start. For a yellow, you frame things around helping. For a green, you give them data. For a blue, you build that personal connection first. For a red, you appeal to their desire to win or be the best.
That's a very targeted approach.
It is. Another huge tool is understanding the power of emotions. Emotions are massive drivers of behavior. If you can induce a specific emotion in someone, you can often get them to act from that emotion.
Like using guilt, maybe?
Yeah, the book gives an example of trying to diffuse someone's anger. You might try to transform it into guilt. Maybe by talking rationally, staying super calm, or even, and this is manipulative, conceding they're right even when they're not.
Why would that work?
Sometimes just feeling validated can short-circuit their anger, shift them towards feeling guilty about being angry instead. It's a redirection.
And fear, obviously. That's got to be a powerful one.
Fear is discussed, more in terms of dominance and submission. The book uses a dog analogy, interestingly.
The dog analogy.
Yeah, like if you cower in front of an aggressive dog, you signal submission, maybe invite more aggression. But if you stand your ground, project confidence through your posture, your tone, the aggression is less likely to follow through. It's about appearing dominant to dispel the threat.
And what about ego? Can that be used?
Oh, absolutely. Latching onto someone's ego can be very effective. The book gives a marital example, kind of hypothetical,
Like what?
suggesting to one's spouse that other people perceive problems in their marriage. This might trigger that spouse, driven by their ego and wanting to look good, to suddenly work much harder on the relationship to prove their perceptions wrong.
Okay, so beyond triggering emotions, what about actually reading the person themselves? Body language and stuff.
This is absolutely critical, according to the book. It stresses that body language is way more significant than the actual words spoken. Cites those studies, suggesting maybe 93% of communication is nonverbal, only 7% verbal.
93%.
Yeah. Gestures, expressions, posture, eye contact, tone of voice. These are the really reliable indicators of what someone's truly intending or feeling. Manipulators might show physical signs of tension, maybe use unnerving or overly intense eye contact, or adopt dominant postures, standing wide, hands on hips, that kind of thing.
And this leads into something called NLP, neuro-linguistic programming.
Yes, NLP. It's presented as a somewhat controversial technique that came out of the 70s, apparently has links to hypnosis. It focuses on really minute details.
Yeah, what sort of details?
Subtle skin reactions, tiny eye movements, small facial tics. Trying to understand how someone processes information, what their dominant sense is. Are they more visual, auditory, or feeling-oriented?
And how is that kind of micro detail actually used in manipulation?
The key techniques the book discusses are mimicking and matching. So, you subtly adjust your own language. Maybe using visual metaphors like, I see what you mean if you think they're a visual person.
Yeah.
You match their pace of speaking, maybe their posture, facial expressions.
Build rapport.
Exactly. To create this unconscious sense of familiarity, of being alike. The key is, don't make it obvious. It has to be subtle.
And once you've built that rapport through mimicking.
Then comes what the book calls leading. Dawson suggests you can test the connection. You change your posture slightly. If the target unconsciously mirrors you, they're receptive. They're ready to follow your lead, metaphorically, toward your goal. Another technique mentioned is eliciting and anchoring.
Eliciting and anchoring. Sounds technical.
It kind of is. The idea is you deliberately draw out a specific emotional response from someone, maybe get them laughing or feeling confident, and then you link that feeling to a physical touch, like a quick slap on the back. The theory is, if you repeat that touch later, you can re-trigger the emotion.
That sounds pretty out there, almost like programming someone.
It certainly delves into the very subtle mechanics of influence. The core takeaway from the book's view is that NLP offers a framework, a way to read subtle cues and build rapport specifically to guide someone's thoughts or actions. And speaking of guiding, deception is another big topic.
How does Dawson define deception? Is it just lying?
He defines it as concealing your true intentions and presenting fiction as fact. But he argues it's distinct from outright lying and can sometimes even serve what he calls noble purposes, believe it or not.
How do you conceal things effectively, then?
The tools listed include simple silence, just omitting facts, or distraction, or covering things up with alternative stories, other facts, or, carefully chosen lies. Though the book advises avoiding blatant lying if you can, as it damages your reputation if discovered. You basically conceal what you fear will hurt you or your objective.
What about half-truths? Are those considered deception?
They're presented as a way of bending the truth, often to avoid conflict or suffering. The book gives this relatable, though still manipulative, example. Imagine you drank too much at a party, stayed over at your boss's house to avoid driving drunk, telling your partner later you just slept in the car. That's a half-truth. It avoids a potentially huge fight, maintains the peace. That's the book's analysis of how that tactic works.
So part of this whole deception toolbox is actually about cultivating a certain image, looking confident, making good eye contact.
Exactly. Having a dynamic personality, making a favorable first impression. If you don't look shady, people are less likely to suspect deception. Influence builds reputation, and reputation makes deception easier. You can bend the truth more easily. Maybe only tell people what they strictly need to know.
And these techniques aren't just for one-on-one, right? This book talks about influencing groups, too.
Oh, yeah. It gives some really fascinating tips for influencing group conversations.
Like what? How do you approach that?
Dawson suggests timing is important. Don't jump in first or second. Wait for the right moment. And choose your words really carefully. They should be clever, witty, relevant to what's being discussed.
Any specific verbal tactics for groups?
Yeah, a few interesting ones. Thank the people who spoke before you. Basic courtesy makes a good impression. Crucially, don't directly attack other people's views.
What do you do instead?
Ask why they see things that way. It's more conciliatory, less confrontational. Avoid nitpicking logical flaws or arguing semantics that tends to alienate people. And interestingly, don't try to put a final, definitive period on your own remarks. Leave space for others to think or respond.
So that subtle courtesy actually increases your influence more than being aggressive.
That's the argument. Way more than direct criticism. But when you do make your point, how do you do it decisively?
Lay out your views clearly, confidently. Be prepared, be sure of your facts, so you don't give people an easy opening to attack you. And here's a really surprising tip.
What's that? Be self-effacing. Be humble.
Humble. How does that work?
Saying things like, well, I'm not entirely sure if I'm right about this, or, my opinions can be a bit vague sometimes. Apparently this disarms people. They feel less inclined to attack someone who's presenting themselves humbly.
That is counterintuitive. You'd think projecting total confidence would be key.
Confidence in your preparation, yes. But humility in how you present it. It's all about those subtle power plays, not brute force. The book also really highlights the power of concise language.
The fewer words, more impact.
Exactly. It gives the example. Knowledge is power. That's punchy, memorable, much better than saying knowledge is something that brings the bearer power. Being able to sum things up efficiently, the source argues, is an art. It makes people listen. It's a basis of influence, which is different from instilling fear. That's just raw power.
What are a couple of other persuasion tools the book mentions?
Rhetoric is one. Asking questions that cleverly answer an earlier point or shake someone's credibility, allowing you to assert your own view. It's presented as a way to win arguments, gain status in a group.
What about sarcasm? Good or bad for influence?
Dawson advises keeping sarcasm to a minimum. Apparently, it often just puts people off. It needs a strong factual basis to land well, otherwise you can just look shady or like a buffoon. It can totally torpedo your credibility. Humor is fine, but relentless sarcasm, not an effective influence tool.
Okay, so sounding reasonable seems like a cornerstone of persuasion.
Absolutely critical. Your arguments need to sound credible. They need to connect with the listener, seem based on reason and logic, even if the underlying goal is manipulative. The aim is to put people at ease.
Any examples of this?
The book gives examples like travel services with hidden costs, credit cards with complex fees, the diet industry using carefully curated before and after photos, situations where appearances are deliberately crafted to differ from the reality. There's a great line, snake oil is everywhere.
Snake oil is everywhere.
And understanding these tricks, the book argues, not only helps you avoid becoming prey yourself, but it also empowers you potentially to use similar methods if you choose.
So while you're persuading, paying attention to how people are reacting must be vital.
Oh, absolutely vital. You have to constantly assess their body language. Are they rolling their eyes, crossing their arms? That means you're losing them. You need to tweak your message, maybe directly address their objections to get them out in the open.
But sometimes people just won't be persuaded.
Exactly. The book notes you also have to recognize when someone simply cannot be convinced and know when it's time to just disengage. Don't waste your energy.
And subtlety, that theme keeps coming up.
It's presented as the hallmark of a master influencer. Don't be aggressive. Don't go full Hulk, as the book colorfully puts it. Master the art of subtlety. Be patient. Be like a butterfly, not a steamroller. Your language should feel open, inviting input, even when you're subtly guiding the conversation.
Suggest, don't demand.
Precisely. Lead people towards your conclusion using logical steps. Statements backed by facts, or apparent facts, offer workable alternatives that maybe make them feel like it was their idea.
And finally, the book mentions listening.
Yes, just as important as reading body language, maybe even more so, give people your full, undivided attention. When people feel genuinely heard, the book argues, they become much more open to your persuasion, your demands, whatever it is. It's a fundamental way to build trust, even if that trust is ultimately being leveraged for influence.
Okay, wow. So with all these techniques swirling around us constantly, how does the book suggest we actually protect ourselves? What are the mind defense systems?
Dawson is pretty direct about this. He states flat out, the only way to avoid becoming a victim is to actively develop a highly analytical mind. You need to sharpen your observation skills, become a really active listener.
Banging.
Meaning you have to process all the incoming data, words, tone, body language, and crucially, learn to question the intentions and motives behind the messages you receive. His rule number one is basically, all is never quite what it seems.
That requires a certain internal strength, doesn't it? A different mindset.
He calls it developing a survival mentality for your mind. Manipulation is presented as just everywhere, part of the landscape, but you can prevent its hooks from getting into you. Through information like we're discussing, cultivating that critical mindset, and having a resolute will to think for yourself.
So reading people, which we talked about as a tool manipulators use, that's also a key defense mechanism.
Absolutely critical for defense. The book reiterates that idea. Mostly ignore the words, the 7%. Focus intently on the body language, the 93%. Gestures, expressions, posture, eye contact, tone, energy signals. These nonverbal cues are far more reliable indicators of true intent. Learn to spot those signs of a potential manipulator. That subtle tension, maybe unnerving eye contact, overly dominant posture.
What about trusting your gut feelings?
Yeah.
Intuition.
Dawson says this is vital. If something feels wrong deep down, you get those red flags in your gut, in your heart, chances are someone is trying to deceive you or manipulate the situation. He advises training yourself to immediately turn on your internal spider senses whenever you feel that kind of unease.
So it boils down to building awareness and confidence in your own perceptions.
Yes. Train yourself to read energy, to get a quick sense of people and situations, and then act accordingly based on your assessment. Nonverbal communication is key to developing this rapid awareness. Being highly aware just makes you significantly less susceptible to manipulation.
But what about trust itself? If manipulation is potentially everywhere, can you actually trust anyone? That sounds like a paranoid way to live.
The book tackles this head on. Trust, it acknowledges, always involves risk. It's like an unspoken agreement of no harm intended, but that agreement can always be broken. We often trust too quickly, the book suggests, even with friends or family sometimes.
And Dawson says you will encounter manipulators.
Daily, basically. It's just part of the human condition, according to him.
But you can't just walk around distrusting everyone constantly. You'd go crazy.
Exactly. You need a certain level of trust just to function normally in the world. The book uses this analogy. You generally trust the dogs don't bite, but you're aware that some dogs do. The best defense isn't total crippling distrust. It's being aware. Being mentally present in interactions. Speaking up when something feels off.
And questioning those red flags.
Right. Asking yourself, is this just me being overly cautious, or am I accurately recognizing the signs of a potential manipulator? It's about being aware and trusting your cultivated intuition.
That's incredibly practical advice. Let's try and bring this home for you, the listener.
Yeah.
How can you take these insights and use them to put yourself more in the driver's seat instead of being driven by others?
Well, the book offers several paths. First, just simply start recognizing unconscious persuasion when it's happening. We're all influenced by suggestions, by social currents, by persistent messages, often without even realizing why we suddenly want those plastic nails, or think parasailing sounds like a great idea, or feel compelled to buy a sweater for our dog.
Things that feel like our own choice, but maybe they're seeded by subtle external forces.
Exactly. So, to actively avoid being controlled by marketing, by propaganda, by other people's agendas, the book's core advice is really to learn the principles of persuasion itself.
Understand the game.
Understand the game. These principles, they're studied in psychology, politics, media. They define persuasion basically as using influence to get people to adopt thoughts or actions that serve the persuader's goals. It's manipulation, really, just in a more subtle, often widely accepted form, and it is absolutely pervasive.
So the absolute key, the bedrock, is to deliberately think for yourself.
That is the central call to action in the book. Be in charge of your own mind. Actively think critically. Buy what you genuinely need or want, not what you're told to want. Vote for whom you truly believe in based on your own assessment. Don't be a puppet. Persuaders succeed because they skillfully tap into those basic human drives seeking pleasure, avoiding pain.
But if you understand these powerful tools, can you use them yourself? Ethically.
The book makes an interesting analogy here. It says these techniques are neutral, like nuclear energy.
How so?
They can be used constructively to build things up or destructively to pull people down. Intention is everything. Dawson really stresses using these tools ethically, respectfully, always honoring the other person's autonomy and agency.
Because misusing them?
Misusing them, like Jim Jones or David Koresh did, ultimately leads to destructive consequences. Often, the book argues, it bounces back on the manipulator themselves eventually. The advice is, use these tools to benefit yourself and others, sure, but without hurting or exploiting anyone in the process.
That reminds me of that fable the book mentions, The Sun and the Wind.
Ah, yes, the sun and the wind fable. It's a perfect illustration of effective, ethical persuasion versus ineffective force. The wind tried brute force, blowing as hard as it could to make the man take off his coat, but the man just clutched it tighter, right? Resistance.
Right.
But the sun, using warmth, gentle persuasion, it simply made the man want to take his coat off, willingly. The message is, be the sun, not the wind.
That's a powerful image. Does the book give any other practical examples of using influence for good? Positively.
Delegation is presented as one example, in a work context, for instance.
How is delegation influence?
Well, it's an example of using influence and managing others for mutual benefit. When you delegate effectively, you clearly define the outcome you want, but you allow the person creativity and autonomy in how they achieve it. This builds their confidence, their skills. You also clearly define their authority, who they can task, what their budget is.
That just sounds like good leadership, really.
It is, and the book presents it as a 360 win. The work gets done efficiently, you develop talent within your team, and you foster trust. It's how successful CEOs operate, according to the book. They focus on the big strategic picture and rely on capable, trusted, trained people. They influence, they guide, they don't try to control every single tiny detail themselves. It's influence used for positive, productive outcomes.
Wow. We have covered a tremendous amount of ground in this deep dive.
No.
Seriously. From defining mind control versus brainwashing, walking through that step-by-step process manipulators might use on individuals.
Right, exploring how these techniques scale up in big systems like education and mass media, seeing how manipulation really can show up everywhere, from cults to, well, hairdressers.
Detailing the specific tools in the agent's arsenal, reading personality types, emotions, body language, NLP, deception tactics.
And then, most importantly, discussing those crucial mind defense systems and practical tips for you to stay in control, to be in the driver's seat.
So the key takeaways, really distilling it down from Dawson's perspective, seem to be trust is fundamental, but it's also a vulnerability. Isolation and emotional manipulation are incredibly potent tools.
That large systems subtly shape our thinking more than we realize. That people are often strategically targeted based on observable cues and their inherent nature. That deception and persuasion are just constant forces in our world.
And that your most powerful defenses are developing that critical thinking muscle, learning to read people accurately, and really learning to trust your own intuition.
And crucially, remembering that while these are powerful tools, understanding them gives you agency. Using them ethically, with respect for others. That's the bright line between positive influence and harmful manipulation.
So, armed with all this knowledge now, how does your perspective shift? When you think about your daily interactions, the advertising you see, the news you consume, the dynamics within groups you're part of.
What specific techniques might you now be able to spot? And maybe more importantly, how can you use this understanding not to control others, but to protect yourself more effectively? And perhaps, just perhaps, influence the world around you in positive, ethical ways.
Okay, so here's the final provocative thought to leave you with, drawing directly from the source material we've explored today.
If manipulation and persuasion are, as this book forcefully suggests, so deeply embedded, so intricately woven into the very fabric of human interaction, sometimes applied subtly, sometimes even unconsciously.
Can we ever truly be certain that any decision we make, whether it's big or small, is entirely free from some kind of external influence?
What does it truly mean to think for yourself in a world that is seemingly constantly subtly trying to sway your mind?